There's concern over tax debt, which has been labelled as a silent killer. Tax debt refers to all outstanding taxes owed to the South African Revenue Service that have not been paid on time. But more often than not, they result from frequent errors or even miscalculations made when filing annual tax returns. Experts say it's important to know primarily where a tax debt can originate from. So let's discuss more on this. I'm joined in studio by Tertius, Troost, Senior Manager at Mazars Tax Consulting. Tertius, thank you so much for your time. Good morning.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Good to have you. This is quite an important conversation, given that it is, a tax season. We have to get our taxes in order. But if we don't, I guess that's why it's deemed a silent killer. Because why?
Yeah, it's not the favorite topic, taxes, and then we even connecting with debt. Yeah. So no, it can easily happen that someone just misses a payment. They don't file a tax return. SARS can even estimate your taxes if they believe you have not filed a tax return correctly. You could have missed an additional assessment, and in that way, there's actually an amount owing to SARS. And usually, what we see is people don't have their particulars or details updated with SARS, so they don't get the necessary notification via email or SMS saying this amount's outstanding. Interest is being levied on this outstanding debt, and therefore this is just an amount that keeps being owed and needs to be paid to SARS.
But also, Tertius, there are consequences to this, whether or not it's intentional or not, errors, miscalculations, there are consequences should you be found to not be up to date with your taxes. But what are they? What could you possibly face? Yeah,
well, firstly, if you're intentionally doing it, there's obviously penalties, fines, even imprisonment up to 2 years. If it's really intentional, even going up to 5 years. So I think it's important to understand that it's going to carry along with you. It's never going to go away. And furthermore, like I said, it's going to be accumulating interest as we go on. And then SARS has different mechanisms of actually obtaining this debt from you. They can even ask third parties to collect it on their behalf, talking to your bank or your employer. They could even start seizing certain assets and auctioning off in order to settle this debt. So it's important for taxpayers to know about the amount that is outstanding, pay it when it is due, and move along with their lives, unfortunately.
And how do you advise that we almost like keep up to tabs with our tax affairs and not wait for the last minute to try and scribble everywhere to find if we're missing anything, but to almost have a relationship with your finances, to know either on a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis, how much you're putting aside, how much you're contributing, and whether you have all those funds available when it's time to pay up?
That's very important. It is planning. I mean, SARS has gone at lengths to advertise tax season. They've given us enough time. They've implemented new strategies, for example, the auto assessments to get the person understanding how much is being owed. They're giving people enough time until the 23rd of October if you're non-provisional taxpayer to submit your tax returns and thereafter pay the tax debts. And similarly for provisional taxpayers until January 24th of January next year. So, I mean, you just need to be up to date. Understand your liability. Usually if you're employed, it's being deducted as you go along in the form of pay as you earn. But if you're running a business or you have a rental income, something that's not always, you just need to understand the expenses and keep proper documentation for it when it comes to filing season.
Right. I mean, oftentimes we hear, updates from SARS when it comes to some taxpayers or South Africans who have funds or assets offshore. And I think it's important to have the conversation because, the big buzzword tax avoidance is quite popular in terms of how can I smartly and intelligently, get away with certain things without SARS noticing. But we know that there are rules and there are implications and consequences to this. So take us through, of course, some of the important, I suppose, updated or even amended rules and regulations on particularly those who may even try to avoid tax, try to hide some funds, and how perhaps, dangerous again that could be for your financial health.
Yeah, the chances of hiding funds, that ship has sailed, unfortunately. I mean, SARS and South Africa and many countries have entered into a number of agreements where they are sharing information between revenue authorities. You would often find when you're investing money abroad, you need to provide them the place that your tax resident, sometimes your tax number, so that those banks can actually provide the information to SARS directly. So it's no longer something that can be hidden, and people just need to be aware of it. So I mean, SARS is running a tight ship. I think they're doing very well under Edward Kieswetter. He's got the large business unit up and running again. He's got a unit specifically for high net worth individuals. He knows that the taxpayers that he should be managing and ensuring that he gives them the service they need so that they pay their fair share. And I think we're actually seeing it in the numbers.
Absolutely. And I suppose, I mean, also just a word of advice for taxpayers who may find themselves in a ditch. You did mention earlier on that tax will use or make use of any, tax, relief measures that they have to retrieve those funds from you. But before we get to a stage whereby you're either, convicted or you're imprisoned or you're fined, is there anything you can do at all, sorting out legal expert advice? I mean, anything you can do to try and help yourself before SARS helps you, probably the most unfriendly way to make sure that they do get those funds back?
Yeah, well, that's a brilliant question. There's also the compromise of debt. So if you really can't afford the taxes that you need to pay, you can actually approach SARS and say, I can't afford it. Can we maybe just come to an arrangement of how I can settle this? Can I settle it over a period? Because I can't pay this lump sum at this present moment. So SARS is not always a bad guy with a stick. Sometimes there's a bit of carrot where they're actually trying to come to grips with how to assist you. So I think it's important to have that dialogue, but at the same time also trying to use professionals where it's needed. If it's very complicated, use your tax practitioners. At the same time, also vet them. You need to understand who you're using, see whether they are registered with SARS, and ask them for their experience. But it's still your responsibility for the final tax return that you are submitting.
Absolutely. And also another important one, perhaps, with taxpayers who may want to know about auto assessments. I mean, are they trustworthy? Are they reliable? That process can be quite daunting for someone who may be a bit reluctant in trusting. But what's your take on rather the auto assessment so far? Yeah,
it's still a project that's in its infancy. I mean, I think we're about 3 years into it. Yeah. So there's a lot of little niggles that still need to figure out. But I mean, I like it. I think it's a lot of information that's automatically inserted. The information comes through. There are still bugs. The refunds are sometimes being paid to people, but those people still need to submit their tax returns on time. Fill in the correct information, so it still remains their responsibility. But for a large amount of taxpayers, they're getting the auto assessment. It says they owe a little amount, they owe nothing, or they get a refund. The refunds are timelessly refunded if they're in that position. So I think it's a good incentive. But like I said, taxpayers need to actually still pull the return, see what has been inserted, do they agree with it, and then accept it. So SARS has also changed the rules that the taxpayers have until the 23rd of October to do it, where last year it was only 40 days after receiving the SMS, which was that just didn't work. So I think SARS is also still trying to just set the parameters, but I think it's a great improvement.
But you're still saying you still would need to file?
Well, you would need to accept it. If you leave it until 23rd of October, it then becomes final, and then you have 30 days after that to then pay your tax return. All
right. Well, Tertius, I appreciate this conversation. Trust me, none of these questions were personal. This was just for the benefit of our viewers. So thank you so much for joining us right here on Newslink. Quite an important conversation to have, I have to say, when it comes to your tax matters, and make sure that you keep up to date, avoid all the trouble, and make sure that you, of course, give and pay what's due to SARS. Tertius, Troost, Senior Manager at Mazars Tax Consulting, helping you and I to make better tax decisions.